The Navigation Security website here is a modified version of the navigation site that we've been looking at. In this site, there aren't any individual pages for each animal, and the animal category pages are located in subdirectories. So we have a directory for tame animals that go down into farm animals and pets, and then we also have another directory for wild animals. This structure lets you place a separate web.config file in each subdirectory to define the authorization rules for that directory. I'll go ahead and run the application. In order to implement the security, we have to know who is using the site. So the home page now contains a login link here. Notice that because we're not logged in, all we can see is the home page. There's no other links, there's nothing else available within the menu, and we can't get to anywhere else in the breadcrumb control. So I'll go back to the project. Here's the web.config file that's in the tame animals directory. Notice that we have an authorization section that allows roles of farmer and family and denies access to all other users. So this authorization scheme applies just to the pages within tame animals and its subdirectories unless the subdirectory overrides these authorization rules. So if we take a look at the farm animals and pets, they also have web.config files. So if I open up the one for pets, we can see that farmers are not allowed to see pets, which kind of makes sense, I guess. So this subdirectory has overridden a rule in the parent tame animals directory. Here's the web.config for the farm animals. Notice that, out of fairness, it denies access to the farm animals pages to the family role. So in this case, only members of the farmer role can see the pages in this folder. In other words, the farm animals page. So the wild animals folder has a web config file as well that grants access only to members of the tourist role. In the example, the role definitions are stored in a database in the app data folder. You can manipulate that data directly using the data tools in Visual Studio, but it's actually quite a bit easier to set them up and maintain their membership using the website administration tool. You need to deal with three issues when you configure authorization. First, users need credentials. They need a login and password in order to be able to get access to the site. And then, users can optionally be assigned to roles. Now it's optional because you can also assign permissions directly to users, but that is generally a bad practice because it makes maintenance of security for the website so much more difficult. Finally, you need to define authorization rules to grant permissions to the different roles. The website's database and configuration files contain the data that establishes the roles in the table. So we have different folders on the website, different roles that have access to them, and the rule on whether or not they are allowed or denied access to that particular page. There's also several logins that are part of the application, Joe Farmer, Joe Family, and Joe Tourist, and notice that the password is the same as the username but with an @ sign. Not the most secure passwords, but they work for a sample application like this. And as you might expect, Joe Farmer is a farmer, Joe Family is family, and Joe Tourist is tourist. And each of these users, through their role membership, has access to different parts of the site. So let's see how this works, how you can configure it, as well as how you can implement site navigation based on this authentication and authorization. I'm going to run the website administration tool to see how the site is configured for authorization and authentication. There's a couple different ways to start it. I can start it from the website menu and run the ASP.NIC configuration, or I can just click the button on the Solution Explorer. Here's the tool loaded. Notice that there's a few tabs and various other links that you can use to configure different parts of the application. Here we're interested in security, so I'll click on the security link. I want to start by managing users, so I'll click on that link. And this page displays the various users that we added that will have access to the site. So using this page, you can add additional users, edit existing users, or delete users, as well as assign the users to different roles. Another thing that you can do with the administration tool is to define the access rules. These are contained in the web.config files in the various site folders. I'll go back to the Security tab and click on the Manage Access Rules. In the sample application, all rules apply to roles. We haven't assigned any access rules to individual users. Generally, it's a lot easier to use roles because adding or removing a user from a role requires fewer steps than granting or denying multiple rights to the user. Over time, permissions assigned to roles are also far easier to maintain. I can navigate around the site structure to see the rules that apply to different folders. For example, if I select the Pets folder, I can see that I have an explicit rule within the Pets folder that denies access to the farmer role. And I can delete this rule if necessary. So this is the one rule that is defined within the web.config file in the Pets folder. These other roles that are grayed out are inherited from other web.config files higher up within the hierarchy of the website. So these are inherited rules. I can override any of those inherited rules within the web.config file in the Pets directory or any other subdirectory. And so in fact, we have an example here where the farmer is allowed to see any pages in the parent directories, but is denied access in the current directory. Deny always trumps an allow. So the end result is that the farmer role cannot see any pages within the Pets directory. I can also add new access rules if I want to, just by clicking on the link there, and I have all the information to define the role that the rule applies to, or a specific user if that makes sense, and whether or not to allow or deny access to the pages within a subdirectory to that role or user. But I have all the rules that I need, so I'll cancel out of that. You're not limited to assigning rules of access to entire folders. You can also authorize pages as well. And the way you do this is within the web.config file for the subdirectory or in the application's root web.config file by using the location element. So that's just another technique. But most often you'll have a far more maintainable site if you stick to creating rules that assign permissions based on an entire folder. All right, so at this point we have all of our roles and users defined, and we've given the users login permissions in order to get access to the site. But we're still not quite done. You also need to configure authentication and enable the role manager in web.config, which you can do using the administrative tool. So let me go back to the Security tab and select the authentication type. Here we have a couple options. I'm going to stick to the default from the Internet. This configures ASP.NET to handle authentication with forms that enable users to log in. The other choice that's available is from the local network. And that's what you'd use if you want to use Windows-based authentication, which is handled by IIS. So I'll go ahead and click on the Done button, which returns us to the Security tab. The Security tab also has a link to enable and disable roles. Roles are already enabled, so I'm not going to click the link, but if you want to disable them, you can go ahead and do that within this administration tool. So these actions within the administration tool have set different options within the web.config file. In particular, it's set the enabled attribute of the role manager to true and has defined authentication to use ASP.NET Forms authentication. So everything is now set up in order to implement security for the application. The other thing we need to do is let users log in. And the way this happens is using different authentication controls that automatically hook into the security settings that you define within ASP.NET. I'll go ahead and open up the master page, because this is where the authentication controls are used. Here's the login status control. This is the control that a user can click on in order to get redirected to the login page. The nice thing about this control is that when the user is not logged in, the link automatically says login. After the user is successfully logged in, the text changes to logout. You don't have to do anything additional to implement that functionality. Here are the properties you can use with the control. Notice that you can customize, for example, the login text in order to specify what the user sees when they're not currently logged in. And there's a few other properties that you can use to configure the control. The nice thing about the control is that it's tightly integrated with security as it is implemented within ASP.NET. The username control shows the logged in user's name. So let me go ahead and run the application to show how all this works. I'll click on the Login button. That redirects to the login.aspx page that uses yet another control that ASP.NET provides that gathers credentials from a user. In this case, I'll log in as Joe Farmer. And log in. And assuming that I entered the correct credentials, we now have access to the site and can do whatever Joe Farmer is able to do. And notice that the username now appears because we included the username control on the page. Notice that we still can't do anything. There's one additional step that we need to do in order to implement the security trimming for the site. I'll go ahead and shut down the application and open up the application's root web.config file. I'll scroll down in the web.config to the sitemap element. One thing that needs to happen is that the security trimming enabled property needs to be set to true. The other thing we need to do is enable access to the tame animals node. The tame animals node within the web.sitemap does not have a page associated with it. But in order to be able to get access to the pages below that node, the different roles have to have permission on that node. So I'll open up the web.sitemap and uncomment the roles attribute that will allow the farmer and family to see that node even though it's not associated with any physical web page. So I'll go ahead and save that and run the application again. I'll log in again as Joe Farmer. And now I'm able to see the tame animals node and can get down to the farm animals because I've enabled security for the farmer role as well as the family role to be able to get through this navigation node. So just be aware that with security trimming, you have to be careful to assign the different roles appropriately to different nodes within the hierarchy so that users can get access to the pages that they are entitled to down lower within the application. You can also selectively display nodes in navigation controls that would otherwise be trimmed out because of authorization restrictions. Why would you want to show a link that the current user couldn't follow? Well, there's various reasons. One reason is that you might want to override the default behavior to enable the user to click on the link and then be automatically redirected to the login page. Then the user can log in as an authorized user and be redirected to the requested page. That's a really nice feature of ASP.NET, where it will remember the page that the user wanted to go to, redirect to the login page. Once the user is logged in, will then redirect the user once again to the page that they originally requested. Another reason you might want to override it is to display parent links that provide a path to other links that the user is authorized to follow, such as we saw with the Tame Animals node in the sample application. So to override security trimming for a particular page, you add a roles attribute to the sitemap node for that page in the sitemap file. If the logged-in user is in a role that is listed in that attribute, the node will be displayed and the site authorization rules won't even be evaluated. This by itself doesn't provide direct access to the page. It will only display the link to the page in the control. You can also display a node to all users by setting the roles attribute value for that node to an asterisk. This is often appropriate for nodes that contain links to external sites. In the example site, you need to add a roles attribute to the Tame Animals node, which doesn't have a URL and therefore is not authorized for any user. And so as you saw in the code, you just add the roles attribute and provide a comma-delimited list of the roles that are allowed to see that node within the navigation hierarchy. So with the roles attribute in place, you'll find that you can log in as Joe Farmer or Joe Family and get the expected results. The navigation controls only show pages that you're authorized to view.